Welcome to the Uncommon Truth. Today, Bob and I have Dr. Sean Richardson joining us from the Gold Coast in Australia. I'm very excited to have Sean with us today, as I have known him for over a decade and have had the privilege of building a great relationship over that time and personally benefiting from his knowledge and experience both personally and professionally. Sean is passionate about uncovering the extraordinary possibilities in people, especially when you are facing significant challenges and change. He's also a bit obsessed with helping people resolve the very human roadblocks to being your best, particularly around performance, health, and well-being. Sean's unique integration of experiences working with leaders to get more out of their teams in elite environments and working with individuals in mental health practice positions him at the forefront of emotional and behavioral high performance. A PhD in performance psychology, focusing on risk factors for overtraining and burnout, Sean intuitively understands what starts and stops people from succeeding. Combining an understanding of brain science and function with a track record of delivering successful behavior change strategies to organizations and teams, and 2 decades of helping people achieve positive breakthroughs in mental health, Sean shows people how to progress along the well-being performance continuum from burnout to resilience to high performance. I have a little more about Sean. He has competed as an elite athlete in rowing, windsurfing, and cycling. Former university lecturer and academic researcher in psychology, performance coach and leadership consultant to CEOs, executive leaders, Olympians, and professional coaches and athletes. As a licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, and mental health practitioner, he translates the principles of mental discipline required for performance at the highest levels in sport to high performance in business and life. Sean is a high performance consultant and leadership mentor in the Australian Football League, published author alongside Darren and Alison Hill of business bestsellers Dealing with the Tough Stuff, a practical guide to the behavioral science and applied tools for getting results from the different conversations in the workplace. He is an awesome dad to Charlotte and Sam, and a humble husband to Kate. Thank you for joining us today, Sean, to discuss and move forward toward finding the uncommon truth about the mindset of transition. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heath. Thanks. That's a bit of a bio to live up to. I don't know who wrote that, but whoa, bit of pressure.
I tell you, well, what I can tell you from my personal experience with you, that's actually probably pretty humble, that bio. So I'm truly grateful to you and the friendship that we've built. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is change. And the only thing that is consistent in life is change, as if I may pronounce it correctly, Hercules made that the very first statement of that. The only thing that is constant is change. So our first question would be, how do we embrace change and successfully transition through the circumstances and seasons of our life? What do you feel the main continuum of that is?
Well, look, I think, probably reflecting on that question, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe let's set a context or an example or a case study. So if we think about it, it might be useful to reflect on, rather than generally on change, but rather we could look at something topical right now. Like, maybe there's, as an example, we could think about what are people facing right now today. Right now we're in the context of COVID-19. It has a global impact on health, on business, on economics, on livelihoods. Could probably suggest that in itself is challenging people with a sense of uncertainty and stress in some cases, and opportunity in others. But it's something that probably in my lifetime, at least, is a bit of an unprecedented in how many people around the world are facing this kind of question right now, this idea of change, uncertainty, potential adversity, and how do we actually respond and transition through it, as you've said. And look, the starting point for me is identifying what are your current tendencies and habitual behaviors around how you perceive change and the different types of change in your life, and what are your automatic responses, and then your deliberate responses. So like if I take this, it's like we could ask people, how are you responding to, the demands, the lockdowns, the impacts? A lot of people have had an impact in terms of their careers, their revenue, their income. If they're self-employed, they might be, looking down the barrel of their businesses failing and shutting down. Others are just significantly challenged and hoping that things are going to bounce back. No one really knows what it's going to look like on the other side. And you're saying, how do we embrace and successfully transition through change? I mean, well, part of it is actually looking at, well, how have you done so in the past? Because if you've been really good at it, I'd go, well, let's ask you how you've done it. So, I mean, yes, you might be asking me, but if someone was asking me that question, I'd be first saying, well, what are your tendencies and behaviors? How do you perceive change? And so perception is the starting point. If someone perceives change, and how do we determine our perception of change? Just listen to your thoughts. What does your brain tell you? What are you sitting at home doing right now with regard to the changes and challenges you're facing? Are your first automatic responses, oh, this is terrible, this is too hard? Your brain immediately goes to what's wrong. We know that human beings sort of tend to fall into different camps around their assessments and perceptions of any event. Do you perceive something as do you focus on the things that are going to go wrong? And there's an element of that that's a good thing to do, to be realistic and assess risk. Or do you tend to focus on possibilities and opportunities and what could go right? And it's not to say that in the extreme, either one of those is potentially unhelpful, because if you're too extremely positive all the time, you might be considered an unrealistic dreamer. And even though that feels nice, you might spin your wheels and get everywhere. Clearly, if you're down the other end of negative, you might be cynical and discouraging and not really get yourself in action either. You look like you have a question there.
Yeah, I think what you've just hit on, to me, we've talked a lot about, and I know that with us in a lot of our discussions with other people over this last several months, our mindset really is, in simple words, is our attitude. And our attitude dictates our altitude. And that's ultimately what you're saying, is what we're transitioning from in a certain circumstance is directly affected by that mindset, that attitude towards it. Is it a positive or is it a negative?
Yeah, look, and I mean, we certainly want to look at how you currently perceive it, but my experience around this is that it's not black and white, and you can't just say, are you positive towards change? Or are you negative towards change? The reality is that as human beings, you'll probably have a mix of emotions and responses. So, the first thing though, however, if you're talking about how do we embrace it, is identify your current tendencies and habitual behaviors. How do you perceive it? Do you perceive it as, you tend to perceive it more eventually as an opportunity to grow, to challenge yourself? Some people really thrive on it, or do you tend to perceive it as, something to set you back? And it might not be your fault. So we talk about automatic responding. It just might be a bit built. We learn those kinds of tendencies from our parents, from our upbringing, from our early experiences. And those are our first perceptions. Then your perceptions lead to how do you respond to change, challenge, or adversity, both emotionally and practically. Are you knocked flat by it for a while, and then pick yourself up? Are you knocked flat and stay in a hole? Do you just get over it straight away and get on to the next thing? Because it's interesting, but when we look at the bigger picture of how people respond to change, there's a transition that you go through, some healthy stages, and oftentimes people jump too quickly to finding solutions. If you've ever been in a relationship and you're the solutions person, always offers everyone a solution, and you might be with a partner, whether it's a business relationship or an intimate relationship, and you're the one jumping to solutions. You might not be actually going through the important stages of actually acknowledging our normal human reactions. So part of embracing and transitioning through change is actually acknowledging and managing our humanness. So, I look at it kind of in several stages. And if I was to outline them all and then go into detail, I'd say, first stage is, identify your current tendencies, how you respond. Identify if there's anything you'd like to change. Do you feel like you want to change? Like, if you're happy with your responses to change and transition, keep going. But if you do decide that there's a gap with, with how you're responding currently and where you'd like to be, well then, okay, identify that you'd like to do something. The next thing we really jump into is the why. Like, what are the top 3 to 5 reasons why you want to actually change your approach, your attitude, your beliefs, your mindsets, your actions around how you respond to change and transition. Then, determine where you'd like to go. It's a bit of that, what is possible, how would you like to respond, determine, either on your own, or if you have the tools to do it, or with help from someone else, what are the key things that you need to change, and then continue to develop and implement an action plan. But even when you've sort of done that, you've looked at your current tendencies, you said, yes, I want to change something. There's a gap between where I am right now and where I want to go. You've got some help. You might have reached out to an expert to give you some help. You got to go back to your why again. Go a little deeper on your purpose. Create a top 10 hit list of reasons why you want to give effort to making a change in your life. Then identify, if you're being really powerful. We talk about risk management in business, but identify your current and anticipate your future personal and situational roadblocks that might get in the way of you actually growing and changing. Once again, go back to your emotions. Like, this is kind of like this rhythmic thing. We go back to your emotions and acknowledge what's coming up for you as you go through here.
Excellent.
And then, yes, develop practices and mindsets that are going to guide you through challenge and change, and ultimately be kind to yourself and set realistic expectations. If you're talking about facing change is, the idea of change is novel. It's something new. It's predictable for it to create, to stimulate our survival system, our brain, and go, that's a bit uncertain. I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to hit pause and put roadblocks up straight away for my brain, saying, if I don't know where to go here, I should just hit pause. I should either figure out if I'm going to take on this change or this challenge, or I'm going to run away, that fight or flight response. But, be realistic in your expectation. You're facing something new and you've made that commitment. You want to make a change. You are learning and developing. If it's new, you're a beginner in some ways, and you can't expect yourself to be that, just to suddenly transition and be awesome at responding to the current situation, knowing what to do in the face of uncertainty, knowing what to do, if we go back to where we're at right now with health or with business, not knowing and trying to figure out is completely normal. So if you don't know and you feel like a beginner, that's expected, and if old tendencies and habitual behaviors and negative mindsets come up, you don't judge yourself for it. That would be predictable because they've been dominant in your life for a long time. It's not a failure if they continue to pop up. It's predictable. It's normal. So, those sorts of things, identify where you're at, identify if there's anything you want to change, identify the reasons you want to change, and then get some help in figuring how to respond to that. Go a little deeper on your purpose again, identify in roadblocks, and you just keep cycling through that process.
That's just great detail, and I've identified it. Bob, what's your thoughts on that with, what Sean is saying and your experience? And I'm going to take a little jib at you being the old guy at the table here. What's your thoughts on what Sean has said and your wisdom?
Well, Sean, really a good summary of change overall. One of my privileges is to work with organizations. And just a very big study recently came out that looked at change in organizations, and they said that up to 70% or higher of change initiatives fail. And that's a fascinating figure, right? Because when an organization tries to change their culture, tries to change production practices, to have a failure rate that high is very costly in time, costly in money. I would guess, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, what do you think 70%, if a person wants to change their eating habits, they want to change their physical fitness, they want to change their relationships, the important things in life, what do you think the failure rate is for human beings, and why do you think that failure rate is that high or low?
Thanks, Bob. We're probably wouldn't put an exact percentage on it, but you'd expect it to be very similar. So when people try to shift or change behavior, even just when you're giving it a rating of failure, you have to qualify that and look at, well, in what circumstance. Like, so if we're looking at diet and fitness, it's like 95% of people go on a diet, put the weight back on again, these sorts of things, is because, so in different areas, you'll probably see different percentages of change, but in general, people are failing most of the time when they're trying to achieve changes in their lives. And, probably more interesting is the question is answering that question, why is that happening? And, well, first of all, is just actually getting into a little bit of the brain science, is that we're actually wired to resist change. And not all of us, but part of our brain, if we look at the survival brain and your limbic system, which is really what makes us similar to, other species where they just have a survival brain. Our limbic system kind of is there to take care of our basic needs. Do I have food? Do I have shelter? Do I have safety? And some secondary needs. And that part of the brain would say, as long as I'm covered, any expending energy on anything else could actually be a threat to those basic needs. So our brain says, as long as I've got a sense of at least being able to survive, change, I'm going to resist giving effort or energy to other things, because I always have to conserve energy in case I'm faced with a new threat in the future. So a part of our brain is wired to resist change unless we're really threatened. So when you see people who might take a serious health scare, whether it's a heart attack or a stroke or some sort of condition where they go, okay, now I really have to make a full-scale lifestyle change. And it's tragic that that's what it takes sometimes. And it's not a judgment of that person, but what it is that they're fighting their own brain. Is that up until that point, it's like cigarette smoking. Prior to 1967 Surgeon General's report that smoking causes cancer, doctors used to prescribe cigarettes. Smoke Camels, it relaxes you, for anxiety and stress and things like these. And so and even then, when that research came out, and for the last 50 years since then, there's still lots of people smoking. Now we're seeing a lot of change in that. It probably took a while for people to really understand that, because there was a long-term impact of something like smoking on their health, until someone really got sick, they got too much benefit out of not changing. So when we look at why people don't change, the way that you're doing anything right now, even if others look at it, even if you look at it as dysfunctional, it's still serving a purpose. So, that smoking might be a habit that serves a purpose. It calms someone's nerves. It makes them feel better in a social situation. If we go to the extremes of drug addiction, it serves a purpose. Often, a drug addict is looking to escape, deep trauma or emotional pain. So that drug is creating so much relief in their day-to-day existence. That's why it's hard to break that. They know that it's damaging their bodies, damaging every other aspect of their life. But that's not as bad as the emotional pain they experience when they're not on the drug. So, we're always looking at that cost benefit analysis, both, just internally in the brain in terms of just its resistance, because it says, why spend an energy on if I don't need to change? So that's a survival mechanism. But then we're also, psychologically, people changing means giving something up, and the reason they're doing that has served a purpose. So those are just sort of some very high level responses to that question of why it's difficult. Is that it's wired into us to some extent, and then it's learned to another extent. But it's not wrong to resist or not to change. And I think that's really important. When I said earlier about be kind to yourself, if you're struggling with change, is that the moment you criticize yourself for change, you're actually going to stimulate the parts of your brain that say, I don't like this. It's making me feel bad about myself. So my brain will actually want to avoid making the change. So it's kind of this reverse psychology, whereas, I'm beating myself up for not changing, but because I'm beating myself up, I'm making the whole process of change negative, and then my brain wants to avoid it. So I might as well stay the same.
So what you're saying is, if a person wants to change, they really have to understand that they're fighting against their primitive brains. They're fighting against their minds. They're fighting against their experience. It really is becomes a mental construct at that point. And it maybe speak to that issue about overcoming that blockade, because I can see that as being a primary block to any change, your own mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking here that it might be interesting to do a little bit of a slide share. I've got a slide that comes to mind. I call it the transition quadrants, and it really is about that, talking more about the emotional journey through change, but in particular in response to stress or challenge or even trauma or crisis. So it could be relevant. So I might switch to doing a slide share here that hopefully the video picks up, so you guys can let me know how that goes. I'm going to share my screen and or share my screen. So you guys should see probably yourselves in a moment or some aspect of my screen. And I'm going to hit play and just make sure that this is working. So I'm going to hit play on a slide.
I've
this all
got it.
showing?
I've got it.
Pardon? You've got it?
I've got it.
Excellent. So we call this I created this slide and this model. I really adapted the original research from Kubler-Ross. I've pretty much bastardized all of her amazing work. So Kubler-Ross was a researcher who did a lot of research on grief and loss and the normal human response to that, and really probably what's a healthy transition through that. And if we're talking about change, it's valuable to talk about this model because this is talking about the green line here. The green arrow is really showing the healthy movement through change. So Kubler-Ross has got some amazing research in grief and loss. What I've noticed is that I've taken a couple of her concepts and then changed all the language, put my experience onto this, created a new model, and really something I've used both with business executives and athletes trying to be the best they can be, as well as, and I've got an interesting story about using this model with a team that lost the premiership, which in Australian football, which is kind of like the Stanley Cup of football over here, the grand final, and how I helped those players respond after that loss in the beginning of the season. And we actually went through this model. So it has all kinds of applications. Originally, it was understanding our responses to significant transition through grief. But it really applies to really any transition. So if I was to talk through it to answer your question, Bob, yeah, absolutely. We have to deal with our emotions first. And this is what it's suggesting. You see there's 4 numbers there: response, coping, meaning, and commitment. On the left-hand side of the model is emotions. And typically, however, what we think of as in terms of responding to change, okay, hang on, is some people are really good at just getting over change, just getting over a stressor or a threat. It's like something's happened, I just keep going. I'm stoic. I can march through it. And we feel strong and we can hold our head up high and go, it's not going to affect me. I'm just going to get over it. What's interesting,
That's
however,
totally
is
my
that
wife. That is totally my wife. My wife.
You realize we're recording this, Bob.
This woman. Nothing phases her. Nothing.
Yeah.
Just boom, on to the next thing.
And look, there's a real, I don't want to dismiss that. There's a real functionality to people who can keep their head high and march through stress and threat and trauma and crisis and get back into action, get back committed, persistent action straight away. However, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. And sometimes it's a short term and sometimes it's a long term where it's obvious. But what it seems like, if we don't actually allow ourselves to be human and face our emotions and deal with that stuff first, it's not like they don't go anywhere. And what we know is that when people face stress, threat, trauma, crisis, and that often comes, and you could, with the uncertainty of change, if we just try to march through and get on with it, what's happening is we're going to take what are very normal automatic responses of our emotional brain, our survival brain, and we're going to just hold them inside. And there's some really, you can test this in a laboratory. There's some interesting research around this. Daniel Kahneman mentions that in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, but research around what happens when human beings, energetically, what happens when people hold emotions inside. And so one of the pieces of research they looked at was they gave 2 groups of people, they let them watch a short film, and the film was emotionally evocative. So, I'm not sure if I didn't see the film, whether it was violent, but it was emotionally evocative. They told one group of people to hold their emotions in, not let themselves feel what they're feeling. And we can do that. We can block ourselves off from emotions. And the others would have been allowed to experience their emotions as they were. what's even stronger around that is if you allow people to debrief and process their emotions and make sense of them, they have an even better experience of going through that. But then they let those people watch the emotions, the two groups, hold your emotions in or allow yourself to experience the emotions, and then give them a task. And one of them, in one instance, was a muscular endurance task. So squeezing a grip dynamometer, which makes your arm very tired. And how long can you hold on to that for? So a physical task. In other cases, they've given mental tasks, like a complex problem solving, which takes a fair bit of focus and brain energy. So you need energy to do that. And what they found was that the group that held their emotions in did poorly, more poorly at the physical task and the mental problem solving task. And the conclusions for that, or the hypothesis that were supported, were that holding stuff in is fatiguing. It fatigues your brain. It takes cognitive effort to hold emotions inside. You have to fight it in. We can be quite capable of doing it, but it's not like those emotions don't go anywhere. They just get locked inside. And unfortunately, they can wear a person down. Now, I can attest to this, as from doing clinical psychology practice, of dealing with people, in their 40s and 50s and 60s who might have been experiencing depression and mental health issues for a lifetime. And when we unpack it and we really dive deep into their life's experience, it turns out they've been holding in emotions since they're, 4, 5, 6, 10 years old. And it's just been wearing them down from the inside. And then they hit this breakdown point in their 50s. And we have to, in looking at this model, we have to go back and help them respond and cope and make sense of those emotions, help them just normalize and be human to feel what they felt and they've been holding in their whole lives. And then eventually we can make positive meaning out of their experiences and try to find the opportunities for growth and development, and then get back in action. So those 4 stages there. But really, like looking at that example from the research around just, watching a short film, well, that's just an acute example, but people can literally hold on to their emotions for a lifetime. So just being stoic and just getting through change, it has its utility. So like if you're in an emergency situation, if you're facing a situation, you just have to respond right now, literally in the moment. You might have to run across the street and avoid a car hurtling down towards you. You don't stop and go, hang on, car, can you hit the brakes there for a moment? I got to process my emotions right now because I'm quite afraid that you're going to kill me. No, you just get out of the way. You just suck all that emotion inside. You don't worry about that, but you'd eventually go home and debrief about feeling like you just faced a life-threatening situation. You deal with your emotions. So there's a time and place and even with athletes, an athlete on the field, on the ice, wherever you might be, I'm going to say to them, it's okay to just get over your emotions in that moment for that, 60 minutes or 120 minutes of the game, but make sure we go back and get through, stage 1 and stage two afterwards, because.
So Sean, one of the comments you made was that a person could hold on to their emotions a lifetime. Are you talking about being stuck in quadrant number 2?
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, definitely. Well, not even being stuck, but being stuck not having done quadrant 2 properly. So if we go back to quadrant 1, so Kubler-Ross talked about grief and loss, and if there's some typical predictable norm in human reactions, which I called response. So the healthy thing is just to allow those reactions, just be with them. And so, someone dies or you lose someone and there's a serious breakup in a relationship, the first reactions would be, shock, like, has this really happened? Which might be followed by denial, this can't be happening, which might be followed by anger or frustration or fear. So they're kind of the very reactive emotions that, like, this can't be happening. Now, if someone goes to the denial stage, this can't be happening, they might jump just to that, just get over it. So they've started in stage 1, but they haven't allowed themselves to stay in it and just go, I'm allowed to feel these very strong emotional reactions. Yeah. They just go straight away, this can't be happening, I've just got to get on with life. I had a client a number of years ago. It was very, very distinct. It was a young girl who, whose father had died the previous year of cancer. It was tragic. And her mom had reached out to me and said, my daughter's really struggling, seems to be quite depressed, is quite anxious. And we started talking to her, and it wasn't like she was denying that her father died, but she I asked her how she responded initially, and she said, well, I just got on with it. She got stuck back into her school, back into her sport. And you know what people around her said at the time? Look at you. Look how good you're doing. Look how strong you are. You're getting on with your life. And a year later, she's having a breakdown because she never really properly grieved for her father. And it wasn't her fault. So there's no judgment of that. But she didn't really go through 1, 2, and 3 at all. She just was like, just get on with life. And so our process psychotherapeutically was help her to go through stages 1, 2, and 3 to allow herself. She had to express her emotions, her fear, her frustration.
That is a great story, and I love the your quadrant here because the title is emotional blind spots, which is so perfect. It's like if you don't know, and just for our podcast listeners, Heath, there's the grid is showing emotions on one side, actions on another side, and then 4 different quadrants. 1 is response with your reactions. 2 is coping, normalizing the emotions and fatigue. 3 is meaning, finding meaning in the event, I guess, creating meaning and possibilities. And the 4th is commitment, persist with a purpose-driven action plan. So response, coping, meaning, commitment, from emotions right through to actions. I don't know if that's a good description or not, Sean, but I think for people that are just listening to this, they should hear those words with anyway.
I'm sure we can make it available for them to download a copy. So
well, this to me, Sean, is something I'm going to put into a really simple analogy. It affects us at a really spiritual level at sometimes, as you shared in a really dynamic case there. But it can happen in just simple practical life of something so silly as a golf game or in a sporting event that you're competing in, and you're playing a great game of golf. And then all of a sudden, you shank a shot, it goes in the water, and you can't recover, and you're taking a double or a triple bogey. Well, this cycle happens in those moments in a competition that you got to go, oh, darn it. It's gone. More expletive words are used than that usually. And then how do I deal with this? And how do I go right through and change that meaning that the whole round isn't over and get all the way back into commitment to the original plan, the original process. Don't be focused on the results. Admit the fact that the game's hard. It's okay to make a mistake, and let's start fresh. Give yourself grace. So that's just a simple analogy in life where it's also applied in everyday life in things that are happening to us right now in a moment that isn't even an epic life-changing moment, that we can apply this knowledge that you've shared to change the outcomes of it. And that really hit me, I guess, I'm kind of paraphrasing it from my simpler view, is that the potential of any moment, right, is affected by my emotions, right? That coping into then leads me immediately into an action based on my meaning that I put on it. That action then gets a result, which then drives that belief or meaning and all the way back up to the overall potential we have or the change that we're having, which you mentioned earlier. Is it going to be a negative change or is it a positive change based on that cycle of meaning that we put on it in that moment and the action that we take next, and then that cycle begins just from a real basic potential of growth cycle.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I rolled out this model with a couple of clients, a couple of businesses over here in Australia, just in response to what's going on with the COVID, the lockdown, the impact on business, people losing their jobs, pay cuts, and the uncertainty of where businesses are going to end up. And the question was, how do we help, and everyone working remotely, and how do we help people stay focused and working well, despite, given the challenge of the circumstances, the uncertainty and the fear. And, you could suggest that you'd think that people would be focused and working hard because of fear. I don't want to lose my job. Like right now, there are no jobs out there to go and apply for that easily. I've got to keep my job. I've got to stay focused. And we think that fear or pressure should keep us focused. But what's interesting is that fear is only a motivator for a very short space of time. It's a very fatiguing motivator, because when you're in a state of fear, you're in that fight or flight response. Your brain has released adrenaline, noradrenaline, the sympathetic nervous system. Your fear is designed for a very quick, immediate response that comes and goes, and then it goes into shutdown recovery mode. The parasympathetic kicks in, and you relax, and you get very fatigued, and you recover. If you're constantly stimulating fear, you're constantly in an adrenaline state. You're constantly wearing yourself out. So people who are reliant on fear or pressure to motivate them to work will end up feeling less motivated to some degree, or in other words, discouraged, deflated, because it just isn't sustainable. And so, I'm talking to them as saying, you've got to address the fear so it no longer fatigues people. And we've got to get to quadrant 3, which is meaning, which we could also put the word purpose in there as well, is help them find reasons for why they're in this situation that help them lift their minds out of it so they can focus. And, I'm very careful here, and I'm going to click on the slide. There's another click here to say that the other response of it, okay, we acknowledge that just get over it doesn't work, but there's a cousin to just get over it, which is definitely better. And you might identify this in yourselves or in people I call it just be positive, and it still skips stages 1 and 2. And stages 1 is respond, just be with those angry, reactive emotions. Don't judge them, just acknowledge them as normal. And stage 2 being coping, which is where you probably go more into the longer, fatiguing grief, sadness, discouraging, unmotivated feelings. Sometimes it can be a bit of relief as pressure comes off, but you're trying to cope. Make those first 2 stages of responding and coping, of just being with yourself as a human being, your emotions, the up ones, the down ones, and not judging them, just allowing yourself to go through those, are important. Because if you'll know those people, you might be one yourself. I've probably done it at times where you just jump straight to, hey, let's see the opportunity in this situation. What's positive? And this is what I'm seeing in a lot of business leaders right now in the current situation with COVID, as the world's sort of challenging, creating uncertainty, and for some falling apart around them, they're trying to be really positive with their staff. And that is good. It's definitely better than just getting over things. But similarly, if it causes people to bottle up their emotions and hold them inside, they get worn out anyway. And they still can have that same experience of being discouraged and fatigued and unmotivated. And then they feel even worse because they find that they can't just be positive. So I've just, if anything, the first 2 quadrants of response and coping, I say just be human first. Then we get to be positive. Then we get to get over it in a way. So it's like, we start with, allow yourself to be human. There are no rules. Respond. Allow yourself your first responses to change and challenge and transition. Be with your emotions. Don't make them wrong. Don't judge yourself for it. If you're looking at other people, allow them to give them permission to be human with that. So you get to the point in the bottom of the graph, we have a word called acceptance, and acceptance doesn't mean acceptance for what has happened necessarily. Like if it's trauma, I don't have to say I accept that has happened. You just say, sort of an acceptance of me being human in the situation. It's okay for me to be struggling and challenged, and I'm at peace with this. Is a challenging time, and I've come to a level of acceptance that this is just who we are as humans in this situation. However, now we bounce into meaning, and we move into that 3rd quadrant where we say, well, what can you do with this situation? What can you do with the situation you're in right now? And if you've sort of come to terms with, I'm a human being having all my reactions, and I breathed in, I breathed out, and I face it. I've not made myself wrong. I've let go of judgment. You'll find that there's like an opening. There's an opening to say, what could I make it mean? There'll be automatic meaning. So when we go back to where I started, which is what are your tendencies right now? How do you perceive change and challenge and adversity? Your brain might automatically go, it means that we're doomed. If that's your brain's automatic meaning, you have to sort of acknowledge that and go, okay, that's not helping. You could go back to stages 1 and 2 again and go, okay, that's my normal response. There's nothing that might be built into the system. I might have learned that through role models. Like, did my mom or my dad always respond to it like that? Did my coaches or my teachers, did my culture around me, did they tend to be a bit more on that, oh, everything's doomed, and be on that more cynical side? And acknowledge that. But then we step into, okay, what meaning can you make out of the situation? So right now, businesses are scrambling, saying, well, look, I have a number, like yesterday I was on a call with a founder of a company, and they said, well, we never get a chance to build our human capability, our capacity, the kind of work that I do. Like, how do we function as a high performing team? We always say that we want to, but we never look that closely at some of the nuances of how we communicate or how we think or some of our mindsets. We have values on the wall, but are we really doing anything about them? We have a bit of time to actually figure out how to do some of that stuff right now. So they're going, oh, there's an opportunity to grow some of our human capability right now. Others are talking about, well, in my business, for example, and I imagine, Bob, you're similar, I've been talking for years about building more virtual capacity in my business, being able to have more online deliverables. Yep. And never seeming to have the more I get in front of people face to face, the less time I have to do that kind of work. Well, now I'm sitting in front of a computer, virtual, online all the time. Now's the time to look to innovate in that virtual way. And so that's the kind of positive meaning we talk about. We say we turn challenge and stress and uncertainty into opportunity. Remember, we can't do that very effectively if we haven't done response and coping and dealing with our emotions. So there's a bit of a rhythm to that. And there's nothing wrong with some regressions going back to those earlier stages of, you might feel uncertain and stressed again, acknowledge it, go through that process, get to a place and go back to your positive meaning. And then, so in positive meaning, we say what's possible, and we do some exploration of possibilities. But if we stayed only in meaning, we'd kind of be dreaming only. And that's where it's important to go, okay, what do we do with this? What's our commitment? How do we act on this and get in action and then really grow? And that's where we step into opportunity. We build resilience, we grow, and we achieve higher performance. But those things are at the outcome of going through those earlier stages.
Well, I'm just amazed at the clarity that this brings for myself and for I'm sure a lot of our viewers today, and it really leads me back to just that remembrance that we really got to be focused on our thoughts and our language. It's something that you've really always been, whether it was with me or with others that I've seen you working with. Our language is so critical in the driving of our beliefs, meanings, and ultimately, which means our emotions and actions are the final result of that. So, and being okay with where we're at in that moment in time, to be able to move forward and actually affect change in our meanings and our beliefs, which ultimately allow us to make better choices. Move forward in transition.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, when we talk about language, and you previously asked that question of me, what are some of the factors in changing our mindsets and our attitudes and our beliefs? And language is a big part of that. And I would suggest that in a way, we're probably talking stage 3 of that quadrant model, where we talk about meaning. And meaning is, our perception, and we could have internal meaning. So that's my language to myself, my self-talk, which is really just my thoughts. It's my awareness of my thoughts. And then there's external meaning, is what I say to others, which then can affect their thoughts and their meaning and their self-talk and their language, and obviously their beliefs. So as human beings, our key way of influencing others, others' behavior, and is ultimately through changing the way they think, and then eventually they shift the way they think and think about their behavior different, and then learning how to respond to that with differences in behavior. So certainly, if I look at that, what are the key factors of in the process of changing your mindset, your attitudes and beliefs? I still go back to, remember, identify why you want to change your mindset. It's like I a lot of times when we're looking at meaning in that third quadrant, it's not just creating meaning and changing language to change mindsets. Is, have you tapped into purpose? Like, why do you want to change? Mm-hmm. Going back to the earlier example, if someone wants to shift something in their health, they want to change their diet to be healthier. Just, having one reason, like, well, I just want to feel healthier, is okay. Or, for some people, I want to lose weight. Why do you want to lose weight? Well, because I want to fit in that suit for my wedding, or I want to fit in that dress. Like, that's a motivator. I'm not saying that's not, but understanding that you have to build a really strong some really strong purpose behind shifting or changing attitudes, mindsets, and ultimately behaviors is really key. So, to create change, we have to really identify why. And we run a whole program on purpose and identifying that why, where we go deep and broad on helping people see that what drives your changes in your life is purpose, but its purpose isn't like I have one purpose. We tend to think of it as a web of purpose or a network of purpose, kind of like a Google search engine, right? Google's founded on the brain. Like if you're searching for a website, the more tags and search terms that are built into your website, kind of the network of terms that get highlighted when someone searches allows your website to drive to the top of SEO. Whatever motivates you should have a lot of search terms, so the more reasons you have to do something, the more it's going to surge to the top of your list of priorities and things that you want to do. So if you want to create change, you got to dive deep on purpose. And we often talk to people about making a hit list, like a top 10 hit list of reasons why you want to create change. So if you talk about the factors in changing mindsets, attitudes, and beliefs, you got to start with why do you even want to change them in the first place, and not just think of one reason. Think of as many as you can and write that down and look at it every day. And then and then you get into, well, how do you? So you've thought of why, and then you got to go, well, to what do I want to change? What are the attitudes and beliefs or mindsets that they're going to help me get to where I want to go? And well, you got to learn them. You got to read about them, learn about the attitudes and beliefs of people who inspire you, who are living how you want to live, who have achieved what you aspire to achieve. Get around people and understand how they think and what their beliefs and attitudes are. You don't have to copy them, but the more you understand, that's your starting place for learning. And then engage, get a coach or a mentor or a performance psychologist, an expert who can help teach you. Mindsets will help you. And ultimately to a mindset, Heath referred to golf earlier. A mindset is a muscle. We strengthen our mindsets, our attitudes and beliefs through repetition. So simple daily rituals to help you practice, the self-talk you have to yourself, what you say to others. If you want to shift your belief structure, talk about it others repetitively. And then follow it up with actions that demonstrate your belief. Think about it repetitively, write it down. Like you're trying to change your golf swing, you do it over and over and over again. But come back to what we said earlier about being kind to yourself, is that if you're shifting a mindset or belief structure, the ones that have been dominant most of your life will continue to be dominant for a while. I once worked with a professional golf coach who said when he asked his players to change their grip a millimeter, he said, don't look at your score for 8 months. It's going to take a while to overcome that old habit, that the change you've made for it to bear fruit. It's going to take a while. So be kind to yourself, be realistic. You might be a beginner in this new attitude or belief. Just keep practicing it, keep getting around people, keep learning it, keep tapping into experts, and be ritual about it. And don't expect, you might get some bonuses and get some really great changes straight away, but be okay with putting in a few hundred and then a few thousand hours of practice.
Well, I think what you've just said here, and Bob, I'll ask for your thoughts on that too, but I think it's being unafraid of failure. We got to realize that it's a fantastic adventure in learning, and that minor change is going to bring that newfound potential that you were just talking about, if we're willing to commit to that change and to that process that you're talking about with rituals, to achieve those outcomes, right? To go through the transition, which really is the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. That's the actual definition. So that was really well said, and it really resonated with me, just how that is a requirement. What do you think, Bob, on what Sean said?
Really a great discussion, gents. Thanks so much, Sean, for sharing all that. I love that. I love your comment about be kind to yourself. I remember I worked with many groups of people, but early in my career, I worked with groups of 14-year-olds to 19-year-olds, and I'd have them in a camp setting where they would share some of their deepest thoughts. And we used to ask questions because 14 to 19 years old, you're making some major decisions in your life with very little experience and probably not a lot of good coaching to on many life decisions. And one of the things that stuck with me was when we asked the question, are you good at decision making? Are you confident in your decision making? Have you made good decisions? The answer was almost no. like a high percentage of the teens would say, I'm just really lousy at it. I made lousy decisions. I wish I understood decision making, right? And what came out of that was their feelings that from decisions they had made very young in life that still were with them today. They were not being kind to themselves. They were not, they felt guilt, they felt remorse, they felt sadness, they felt all the negative emotions that go with making bad decisions, I guess. And they didn't see the opportunity. They didn't see the win. They didn't learn the lessons, or at least they didn't articulate the lessons, or couldn't at that time articulate the lessons. So when you say be kind to yourself, I look at my own life, right? And the massive amount of failure that I've had. But somewhere along the line, I learned that failure was good, that there was meaning. Going back to your thing, there was meaning. And there was an intentional movement from kind of going down from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2 into meaning, as you accepted the reality of that bad decision or that stress or change that you're going through in your life, that you could make an intentional decision to find meaning in it, right? And then make an intentional, take intentional action, make commitments from that. So I'd like to hear both your gentlemen's thoughts on that particular phenomenon. It's like, how do you move from the feelings of sadness and despair and failure, all this negative things, to the positive things? Like what can we do to help people? What can people do to help themselves?
Yeah, look, Bob, I think earlier on I mentioned when we're talking about just what's the process of change, the transition, and went through the 4 quadrants. That's really sort of that emotional journey of change. But I mentioned what I spoke to originally was, identify what you're doing right now, figure out where you want to be, set some goals, create an action plan, tap into purpose. But one of the things I mentioned there was also understanding roadblocks. And so, you might make a plan to make a change and feel like you're failing at it. One of the things people don't do is they don't recognize the roadblocks, the human roadblocks. And how do I help people move from insight into, a bit of insight or just the impetus to change? Like they go, I want to actually creating the change we have to very quickly get into that discussion of what is going to stop you. So some of the stuff we've already talked about, your brain's going to, let's acknowledge your brain's going to stop you. That's part of the, being human and being kind to yourself as a human is part of just acknowledging that roadblock and breathing in, breathing out and saying, it's okay. Part of my brain doesn't want to do this. I'll tap into purpose. If my purpose is strong enough, my thinking, my why I want to make this change is strong enough, it should get me in action. But one of the other roadblocks, just the standard roadblocks built into the human system is, as I mentioned, is that conservation of energy. Your system 1 brain, as Daniel Kahneman refers to it, which is your automatic survival emotion-based brain, has got some really simple strategies. The conservation of energy is one of those strategies, which is, you can imagine if we lived in a primitive world, a lot of the things we do in the modern world, our brain in a primitive world would just say, don't do that, because spending that energy could put you at risk for dying. So it's like, I live in primitive times. We've got to hunt the woolly mammoth. I need a lot of energy to hunt the woolly mammoth. I've got to, get the last kill before winter, or else we'll die in this winter. So I wouldn't go and run a marathon just for fun. I wouldn't do a triathlon. I wouldn't stay up, for 3 days studying for an exam before going to hunt the woolly mammoth. I just wouldn't expend that sort of energy doing those sorts of things, because my brain says you've got to conserve energy at all times, because when you need a hunt, you need to be at your peak, because if you don't, capture your prey, you will die. So conservation of energy is inbuilt into our brain. It's always there. It's been part of our primitive brain, but it's not going anywhere. So we have to overcome that as well. We have to, which is why we talk so much about purpose. We need something to overcome that. So a lot of the things I would already say that those are the building blocks. Those are some of the roadblocks that are just built in the brain. But then each individual, when I sit down with them to talk about change, I was just talking to someone yesterday, a new client around this, is identifying their starting points. What is their core roadblock? What are some of the key things right now? So for example, if I'm working with an athlete, you know, where's their, even though I'm a psychologist, I'm going to still talk to them about their physical health. Like, you know, I like to use the sort of the analogy of a marathon runner coming to me and said, Sean, you know, this sports psych, I need some strategies. I need some mental strategies. I got to be more resilient. I'm just not training very well. I'm going out. I got like 10, 12, 15K runs I got to do. And I'm getting like 500 meters in and I'm giving up. I just don't feel like doing it. Come on, give me some strategies. I'm struggling. And I say, hang on, well, let's find your starting point. So where's your health at? Like, how's the body? Like, I'm not a sport physiologist, but just how's the body? Oh, well, I've got a broken tibia, a fractured tibia. Don't worry about that though. Like, I got to push through that. Like, I just need some strategies. I need some mental strategies. And I'm going, seriously? Like, no, you need to sit on the couch and heal your bone before you can run. But it's sometimes that ridiculous when we don't look at our roadblocks, when we don't sort of look at our broader life and say, what are my current challenges? So, you know, that one's obvious and that doesn't really happen, that someone's got a broken leg and they keep trying to run. Well, sometimes it does actually happen. It has happened in sport. But, you know, sometimes if we look at our lives, we're trying to push ourselves at that level of ridiculousness. Like, someone might be sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. And this is much more common. They're sleeping 3 hours a night and they come to me, their HR director is referred this as an executive at a company. This is a real case study. And the person has come to me and say, I have to quit my job. I'm just not good enough anymore. And once again, I ask that question, what's going on in your life? What, you know, let's look at a few areas. What's going on socially? How are your relationships? How are you mentally, emotionally, physically? You know, what's going on? Oh, well, I'm struggling to sleep. Okay, well, what does that really mean? Well, literally, I'm getting a patchy 4 hours a night. So I may be sleeping 3 hours. And then I'm an overload of stress. I've just been I've been on a project team for the last 10 months and we failed. The project failed, the bid failed. And I'm like, wow, like that, it's really normal. You're feeling absolutely burnt out. Now is not a time to make a decision about quitting your job. And it's not that you're not capable. No one would be capable of doing that job in your state. We've got to get sleep back in your system. How's your diet? Well, typically when people are feeling lousy, they eat poorly too. So diet was down the toilet, sleep was terrible. And then of course, the mental game of making meaning of his situation. He was looking at himself going, well, clearly I'm not good enough. Worked for the company for 15 years as a brilliant employee. So clearly he was good enough. But in that moment was making assessments based on how he felt, which was feeling terrible and burnt out, was ready to quit his job. This is like a few months ago. I'm like, you got all the support you need in this company. They want to, you know, help you work with me. Don't quit your job. Let's just first get a few things right. Your key roadblocks right now are energy in a big way. Like, you need to get out of burnout. We've got to manage your energy. We've got to get you sleeping. We've got to get you eating better. We got to just get you so you're functional, because you can't even assess your own capability. You can't even do your job right now. You're like the marathon runner with a broken leg. And so for me, that's really the key starting point. Is as much as we want to talk about goals and strategies and mindsets and emotions, I want to really still understand, as soon as we talk about those and decide, and your why and your purpose is really important up front, but then immediately going, okay, the why not? What's in your way? What might be the roadblock? Is it something personal? Is it health-wise? Is it physical? Is it something situational? You might have just moved country. You've just transitioned to a new country. You don't have any friends. You're concerned about, you've got to perform in your job to keep your visa. Like, those are situational challenges that would mean, that create extra stress. So I'm looking at all aspects of someone's life and saying, what potentially is going to draw energy away from what you're trying to achieve right now, and start with some foundations and get some, core foundational principles in place. So when we understand those roadblocks, and those are just some of them, like, understanding people's roadblocks is really, it comes in at every stage. It comes in at the starting phase to say, let's make sure that we've resolved anything that's going to stop you before you get started. But then we're constantly asking that question the way through someone's journey, through their whole life, and saying, what can we anticipate might be a challenge. In businesses, they might call that risk management. But, so it's not I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot more elements, but if I'm looking at how do I get people into change to overcome that, you said, here are these kids that don't believe, they look at their attitudes and beliefs. They've had some experiences in life. They don't think they can make changes. We want to go right to that root cause and say, well, what are the causes of where those attitudes and beliefs come from? That might be the most persistent roadblock. Yeah.
Well, Sean, I'm blown away. I've been taking notes fervently here, writing and on this. And what I've really realized from all of this is that change takes a lot of energy, spiritually, mindfully, as well as physically. And getting that balance and coming from a position of strength as much as possible. We got to get to at least a basic equilibrium before we're really capable of making good and wise choices about change and transition. That whole mindset of transition that we've really talked about here today is unbelievably powerful. And for our viewers, I'm going to try to just put it down into Heath points and then sort of get you to kind of agree, change it, and wrap that up, because I think we're there. Because I know what I want to do is I want to have you back, and I want to talk about energy health, because I see this as critical. I know you've helped me specifically in my life around this, and that capacity issue for all of us is that we overdo it quite often, and we don't know if we're overdoing it until snap, something breaks. That's the normal human condition. But just to kind of summarize it, and the best way that I'm capable of, what I've heard is the most important question to ask at first is, where am I now? And then secondly, where do I want to go? Now I have the two key points of creating a map. Now, what does that really mean? Well, to me, that then leads to the question of, do I like where I am? And am I close to where I want to go? And do I even want to change and go through the growth that's going to be required in transition? Which means, unfortunately, in most cases, in my experience of life, pain is going to happen if I'm going to go through some form of growth. So and that kind of is it's a human condition. It just is required, whether it be physically, mentally, having to change a belief, digging into those roadblocks and those root issues, because the fruit isn't the problem. It's always the root that's causing the problem. So do I want the change? Once that's decided, then that big why question, the purpose that you and I have talked about so much, and Bob, we talk about a lot on other shows as well, are why. Why do I want to make this change? What is my real purpose for this? What outcome is it going to lead to? That then requires us to define the plan. If I know where I'm going and why I'm going there, what's the map? What is that massive action plan that we've talked about? And these are the things that you've been so amazing in my life, Sean, and different areas of my business strategies and things like that we've talked about. And Bob and I as well. And we're working in our life in different businesses that we've owned and operated. But a map is only as good as the action. A saying I say all the time: your reality equals your dreams acted upon. And if you want to have what others have, we have to be willing to do what others do. And most cases, that means if I want to be a world-class athlete, then I better create the rituals, the habits for the results of a world-class athlete. Those rituals are going to ultimately create a lifestyle or a new environment for me to actually grow in and transition from one place or state to another in that by the repetition, which is the mother of all skill, and go through that, repeating it day in, day out. What we do consistently is what actually causes the change. Not, well, I did it one day a week, went to the gym. No, I went and I did something active every day. A walk, I hit the gym one day, I played some golf. We're being active and healthy in our body, our mind, and our spirit. And then the last thing, which I think Bob really emphasized, be kind to ourselves. And I think that really comes back to the really basic principle of love. You got to love the process. We got to love our life, which is living intentionally focused on executing. Another one of my Heathisms. And that overall being kind to ourselves is going to allow us to enjoy the process, to have that strong mindset that you spoke about, that we're going to actually be positive about the change. This is an opportunity working through COVID because I'm going to focus on new technology, the ability to communicate through different vehicles or whatever it might be. Or is it, I have to? No. We get to. So this is the type of things that really were punched in my face today in my lesson here today from you on the mindset of transition. Bob, is there anything you want to add before we let Sean sort of give his closing comments on if I've summarized that well?
No, I just want to thank you both. I mean, wow, great discussion. Sean, tremendous insight into the subject. I really appreciate that. And your time today. So nice meeting you. I look forward to chatting with you again, sir.
Thanks, Bob.
Do you feel that I summarized that in a concise enough manner in layman terms?
Yeah, look, I absolutely, Heath. I think there's a simplicity to this, and I, if I could close off, I tend to summarize everything through an overarching model, which I call the AIR model. And I've shared my screen again. Listeners won't see this, but they might be able to download it. But it really is a very simple summary of. I use it. Actually, it's a change model I use in organizations. So I've used it in large organizations just to talk about if you're trying to achieve a result or a goal, you want to shift something in your life. You start with your goals, your possibilities, and then the AIR stands for the first thing you got to figure out is what do you need to do? Take action and implement that action. But action doesn't go anywhere without some inspiration. So that's the I. So we have A plus I. You need a purpose. We've already talked about A plus I. You got to be aware of those roadblocks. So we have a minus R. You need to be able to resolve those roadblocks. What are the roadblocks that get in the way? And then none of that gets anywhere unless you have health and well-being. You need to be able to give effort to your actions. It's great to have an action plan, but you got to give a quality effort, but you can't give effort unless you have health and well-being so that you have energy, literally calories and energy in your body to be able to, and enough energy every day to implement your action plan. So you got to multiply all of that by effort. And then what sustains your effort and what keeps you on track are the mindsets, is the way that you think, is the way that you interpret and perceive. So this, I'm putting up here as a final summary of the day is that when you get actions plus inspiration, you're aware that there's roadblocks that get in the way. So it's just A plus I minus R times effort and a bit of mindset. That's your pathway to success. And if I was drawing this out, I'd have an infinity sign through this model that basically say we're basically revolving constantly through all these areas. We set a goal. We're constantly tapping into purpose. We're constantly checking in on what our roadblocks are. We're constantly refining and looking at our action plan. We're constantly checking in on our mindsets to keep us going, the helpful ones, the unhelpful ones that stop us. We're constantly making sure that we're managing our energy and that it's in a good place so we can give effort. And then when we get some results along the way, if we failed, we don't get knocked back by them. We just use them as to assess where in our plan we've gone wrong. Or maybe we just say, hey, I've done nothing wrong. We just need more time doing this. And so failure is that feedback mechanism. And eventually over time, when we keep sort of moving through all of these parts of the model, we move forward, we progress, and we achieve what we want to achieve.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today, Sean. I really am excited. I'm actually going to put it out there that I'd love to have you back to talk about energy health in more detail, because we literally just tipped the tip of what we can offer to our audience about that. And I really look forward to us doing this again soon.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, mate.